Welcome back, everybody. This is Bruce Bozzi, and you're listening to Table for Two. While it's hard to resist LA in the spring, I'm about to visit the beautiful south of France for this year's Cannes Film Festival, which makes my guest today super cool and appropriate because not only has she walked the red carpet on the Promenade de la Fossette, she's attended the festival premiere of her own films, and in 2015 sat on the feature film jury. She's a serious movie star.
Oh, sorry, my
Gorgeous woman, hi.
We just met at an Oscar party, and it was, no joke, love at first sight. She's a very talented actress, a climate advocate, and, as she proves in Extrapolations, her latest show on Apple TV Plus, she's sometimes both things at once. What's more, she's an incredibly fun lunch date.
Are you having a rosé?
I am.
God, how divine.
So grab a rosé and get comfortable because we're having lunch with Sienna Miller. I'm Bruce Bozzi, and this is my podcast, Table for Two. How's your morning been?
My morning has been eventful.
Okay.
I had to do like a climate summit
Really?
panel situation at the Pendry Hotel around the corner.
Yes, sure.
So then,
you
I
look
had to do hair and
busy.
makeup, which is why you said I look
Right?
nice.
You look beautiful.
From 7 in the
You
morning.
would look beautiful
No,
with
God.
nothing. Please, are you kidding me? This is
I love you, and we're
crazy.
having lunch every single day.
Okay, that
And
would be
dinner
a gift.
and breakfast.
dinner.
Yeah.
Which means now we're going to be a couple. Just so you know.
it is on.
It's 2023.
So that was that, and then I had a meeting, and then I came here, and then I have to go from here to James Corden.
I know you got a busy day. Do you feel like a pressure with being sort of the voice of and sitting on the summit? I mean, it's a passion of yours, and you were an early climate,
Climate guy?
advocate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You were a pioneer in the way of like what's happening. How did that begin?
I like that. I'm a climate pioneer.
You're a
I
you
got
are.
involved with an organization called Global Cool, and this must have been like, I don't know, 2009.
Okay.
And we went to India, and we actually got legislation changed in India, which needed to sort of to have some action in that department. But it was an interesting trip. I got to meet with like all of the Indian Bollywood movie stars.
Okay.
Amitabh Bachchan being like God there.
Right.
And it was successful and it was great. But it was still kind of new. We were campaigning to get to be just lower carbon basically.
Mm-hmm.
And interesting statistics like if you turn your thermostat down 2 degrees, that will save a ton of carbon a year. Just little things
Like
that people
things
just
that-
don't know.
Right. They don't
But
know.
I am by no means an expert on the climate.
You don't have to be an expert on climate. You have to have an awareness and a passion because the little thing of turning your thermostat down makes
It's
a
an interesting thing
significant
to know.
difference.
I mean, and not necessarily a passion, but I think at this point it's important to acknowledge that it is a reality,
Yes.
which of course some people are in complete denial of.
Yeah.
And it's great to make a show about that because I feel like any show set in the future that doesn't include a radically different climate is science fiction.
Right.
So it's kind of...
That's so sad.
I
to
know,
hear, but you're right.
So making a story that is about connectivity and human experience with the backdrop of a version of the future that might hopefully be different, but
Right.
is a potential,
Right.
will connect people to what it actually is more than a graph or a documentary, as impactful as they can be, but you just are sort of left feeling slightly like it's abstract to you. So I think Scott Z. Burns, who created this, he's obviously been a pioneer in that field of Inconvenient Truth and all of that he made. And Contagion, the guy's a prophet. I mean,
Yeah,
he made
is a
that.
prophet.
It's just, he's
I mean,
very
Inconvenient
prophetic.
Truth. I remember where I was when I saw that movie.
Yeah.
I think that goes to the point. It's why my hats off to you is my hats because I wear
You
many
have
hats.
7 hats
I
on
have
today,
7
ladies
hats
and gentlemen. You can't see Bruce, but
because this is like a recurring theme when I have conversations with people. Like the one person makes a difference in the world. So like you are making a difference. You're choosing work projects that reflect your beliefs, that reflect your commitment to saving the planet, changing the planet, helping the planet. You know what I mean? All the things
I
that we
am
all should do.
saving this planet one
You
project at a
are-
time. No,
Yeah, you're going to be starring in a Marvel movie soon.
I know, literally.
It's
Watch me like pow, everything
right,
blowing
bam.
up. No, but it's actually a perfect confluence of circumstance that,
Yeah.
that things that are socially or environmentally interesting have come to me. Because of course, I mean, it may look that way, And I suppose I am drawn to things that have something to say because I find the medium of storytelling really powerful.
Yeah.
For me personally.
Yeah.
Actually, Al Gore I went to a talk that he gave after watching An Inconvenient Truth. And that was what galvanized my wanting to get involved.
Really?
So I think everybody really, it was the first time that had been something that we were even aware of. I mean, it
Completely.
was such a shocking thing. And now I have a 10-year-old who's at a progressive school, and it's so part of the curriculum. It's so
Right.
part of her experience growing up. She's so aware of things.
It's amazing.
Amazing, because we were just like, I was at school in the 90s, and we were just smoking some sort of looking at rock bands. And
I'm a decade ahead. So like
Yeah.
the 80s, this was not discussed. Then I saw like you Inconvenient Truth and thought, oh wow. And now all I say is, this is what he said. These are the monsoons happening. These are the floods. He said there's going to be weather patterns that we never saw in regions of the world that we've never seen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's truly there. And always was like, it's coming. We can get ahead of it. We're not ahead of it, and we're not getting ahead of it.
No. And it's time, like it's all very well being hopeful and having faith in people. And there is a way to greatly and drastically impact the way that it goes. But like we're there. We're
Yeah.
living it.
Yeah.
And we can slow it down exponentially.
Right.
But it takes radical change and a government, obviously, that believes that it is a real thing.
Right.
And people to be really conscious of the fact that it's not about what your experience on the planet is, but what is left
100
for the others
yeah.
that we bring into this world.
Yeah. So Extrapolation it's a massive cast with like incredible people. How was it? What is it like to work with all the people, or like?
Well, I didn't actually, because everybody does different episodes. So mine was 1 and 2, and then I
Okay.
popped up in a later one, which was a last minute decision. But mine was predominantly with, well, I'm just going to drop a name here
Yeah.
because why wouldn't you? Meryl Streep,
Right.
who played my mother.
Wow.
So I am now going to like mic drop, leave the industry. I've ticked every box.
You really have.
I mean, I've
Seriously.
looked into Meryl Streep's eyes and soul, and we've both cried. So where else can
right.
I go from here? And Tahar Rahim, who was brilliant, and João Paulo, this gorgeous boy who played my son. But it was a small, intimate set and cast. But then, of course, and we were the first two, so they hadn't added the multitudes of
Right.
incredible star power that it ended up being. But I mean, so many people are in this.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. And I think with the intention of being a part of something that can narratively explain,
Yeah.
a potential, extrapolate on what the future might be.
Right. Well, I think like with all the stories, because it's all about storytelling, it's all about people feeling something. These are
Yeah.
like the projects to do, and they're scary because at one point they were science fiction to us, and now they're not. like
Yeah.
you said. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, like that's crazy. But you're like super busy because My Mother's Wedding, which you
Yes.
shot with
Working title.
Scarlett Johansson, working title.
Who we love.
Kristen Scott Thomas directed and starred.
Her first movie that she
I mean,
directed.
that's a big deal.
Yes.
So we do love Scarlett.
We honestly, I went to make a movie and I made a best friend.
Right.
I know she's talked to you on this show.
Yeah.
And you've known her for years. She's one of the most spectacular women I have ever met
Yeah.
in my life. She
Well, you know
really
what? She
is.
reminds me of you because you're both like down to earth, absolutely like focused. You know who you are. Both stunningly beautiful. That's
Oh my
that's
God.
inside and out. I'd say really as
She's
important.
an extraordinary
She's incredible.
woman. Yeah.
You also have The Anatomy of Scandal on
Yes,
Netflix.
yeah.
You live in New York
I live in New York.
and you're moving to London.
I'm moving back to London in the summer.
And we both agree that New York for children's a little intense.
Yeah.
So like what's driving you back home?
Honestly, after the pandemic, so many people that I loved left the city and went back home. And I think I was in New York for the pandemic, and being far away from my family was rough with
bet.
no opportunity to get back.
Right.
And I think we all kind of reevaluated our priorities, mine being to be close to the people that I know and have loved for many, many years. I was so in love with New York, like a lover. Like
Right. Yes,
since I was
it's that
18
kind
years
of
old, I would
city.
land and be like, oh,
Right.
and it was an entity. It
Yeah.
is. It's like a powerful
Yes.
place. But I just recently just kind of fell out of love with it. I'll tell you what
Really?
happened.
Yeah, tell me why. Tell me.
have rented for years, as you do in New York, and
Right.
then, added up what I would have been able to afford had I not been renting for years. And just
Right.
like whipping myself because it's what people do in New York. But my poor kid has sort of moved from place to place to place, and it's nomadic, and that's
Right.
what it is to be an actor. And she's
Right.
very well adjusted and adaptable because of it. But I was like, no, New York is home. We went back to London for a year over the pandemic. She did school there. We went back. We were like, no, we're going to live in New York. So I bought a place in the West Village, and a week after moving in, I opened the front door. This is not really lunchtime chat.
No.
To take my daughter to school, and there was a human shit on my doorstep. And I just hoisted her over the human shit and took her to the bus. And it was hysterical.
Right.
I also realized like the only person that can pick this up and deal with it is me, because I can't be that much of an arsehole to get someone else to do it.
Right.
And you can never unfeel the weight of a human shit that you've
Right.
And then obviously I grew up in England where there's a national health service. So people who are clearly in need of help and medical attention can't get it there. That becomes increasingly sad.
Yes. Wow. It's so
and
heartbreaking.
then lockdown drills at school. I
Right.
didn't grow up with guns, and it's a real adjustment to get to a place where if you even have that intrusive thought for a split second, which you have to if you live in America, it's
You
a
do.
reality. All of those things, and
Right.
I was just like, oh, I got appendicitis in November. And mercifully, I had a friend staying. But if I didn't have anyone to be with my kid. And I suddenly realized I have no infrastructure.
Right.
Her dad was filming, and
Right.
so yes, I just
Well, you really
ready
just
for
pointed
home.
out, like, really.
I listed some real doomsday shit.
But you know what? It's the truth. I always say, like, the conversations that my daughter is listening to now, I'm like, this is heartbreaking. Like, these kids have to deal with major catastrophes or conversations that we just didn't
Difficult to have those with little people, but it's the world.
But it's their world. I
Yeah.
mean, I would say really post 9/11, everything changed for them.
Yes.
Like where we were growing up in the 90s or the 80s, it was like, there was some real shit going on in the 80s and stuff, but 90s, but it was like, where are we going tonight? Like,
Yes.
what party are we going to?
I don't
Like,
go
what
out
club?
anymore, so what's the point of living in New York? I mean, I love the
Well, that's
theater
true.
and I love but I don't really. I sound like such a dinosaur because I kind of am. I'm not on social media. I find that I feel a bit like bit quieter right
I get
now.
it. I think the most important thing you said to me is the support and having family.
That's the
and
thing.
raising a family and being able to know, because without that, I mean, what is there?
Yeah, it really, and we all kind of understood it in a way. I was very happy to be off doing my own thing until a global pandemic, when you're like, actually, it's such a huge part of your DNA, the people that you know and love and are accessible, and it became inaccessible.
What did you love? Because we can both step back into the other world, because I think the world's changed.
Yes.
What did you love in I always say, like, the 80s and the 90s, it's like I say to Ava, you just didn't grow up. And you being you, this like incredible, beautiful, like charismatic, like you are a grabber of life. What did you love?
I'm blushing. You can't see it.
What
well,
did you
I was
love
born
about
in the
those
80s.
years?
So the 80s, I remember being very, very little and walking down the King's Road with my mum and seeing punks. Like, I do have memories of the 80s, but they're cloudy.
Right.
But I remember that being fantastic.
Right.
Because that was where the punks hung out. And so culturally, that was influential, because it was exciting and vivid as a kid to remember, like, the fashion and then the 90s, I was at school and I was sort of watching it from afar, but everybody in England behaved appallingly in the 90s, and it was absolutely acceptable.
Right.
I remember,
It
like,
was sexy.
It was sexy, and it was irreverent, and it was funny, and no one was trying to please anybody, and it was very honest and very authentic.
Right.
Like the Brit Awards in 1996, I remember watching it. Jarvis Cocker did something with Michael Jackson, and then the Gallaghers and Oasis were just outrageous, and people were just crazy. And it looked so fun. I was, of course, like stuck in an all-girls boarding school wanting to be having fun. So I really emerged in the early 2000s in the world.
But don't you think, like, London always sort of set it's kind of set a bar. It kind of was the influence of the punk scene coming to the States, rock and roll, fashion. It just, and seemingly today, I think it was voted like the #1 city to be in. Like,
Was it?
yeah, in the American.
Proud.
Right. But
A little bit of pride
I
over
think
it.
it was a wild ride.
It's weird when you think about England as this tiny little island that has had, well, through often appalling behavior, but big influence in terms of music and fashion. And
right.
yeah, I think the whole world is sort of one thing now in many ways because of the connectivity of what social media has done. But
Right. I mean, were you acting then? You
No.
When did you start to, you were modeling then? You were,
I was like the shortest model that ever lived. but people liked me, so I'd sort of get booked on jobs and not fit the clothes.
all right.
Because I'd be funny and let the other proper models, get out of their
Right.
shells. But the kind of character photographers, I know he isn't working anymore, but Bruce Weber was a huge part of my early career in that.
I love Bruce Weber.
I think
I
he's the
love his
most,
photographs.
it's beautiful. And his
Beautiful.
sets were like, there was an elephant. I used to do I did like the odd commercial thing, like a Wrigley's advert and a German Coca-Cola advert. And I was like, commercial,
Right.
which is like not chic, but whatever. And then I met Bruce and we just got along. And so he cast me in an Abercrombie and Fitch thing. And then the Pirelli calendar.
Right.
So I was just nude,
Oh,
sort of
right.
with an ice cream, and I was in heaven.
Right.
So that wasn't a very long. It wasn't a very long career because my goal was always to act.
Right.
I was so set on doing this as a career that I was probably just way too extra. But I remember we did Joseph at school, and I was Potiphar's helper, which is just like the shittest. I mean, first of all, it's like not even in the script, and second of all, like I just sat there at Potiphar's feet with a palm leaf fanning Potiphar. And of course, in my mind, it was like, I'd constructed this whole backstory to the helper and where, he'd come from and took it very, very seriously with this leaf. But I was not seen. I was underrated, which is a theme that actually hasn't left me.
Okay, when would you say, so not, what was like the moment that you thought that you got cast in something that you were like, oh, okay, now I'm in this game. I'm in this game.
My first film was Layer Cake, which was a British sort of gangster film. Daniel Craig was the lead, and
I love Daniel.
I know.
And I took
Oh,
Daniel
you had
to
martinis.
His gay bar.
Oh, he loved the gay
He
bar.
loves the gay bar. Got all over the place. It was like a whole scandal, but we had the best time.
Really? Oh, was
my
that
God.
you?
That was me.
Oh,
on
my
the
God.
National Enquirer. We went out.
Oh, my God. Oh,
Brian
my
was
God.
in London, and I was taking care of Daniel. Like, okay, let's
That
hang
is
out. And like,
hysterical.
it was a
Oh, my
fantastic
God.
night, and the poor man will never live it down. Daniel,
No.
I'm sorry, but I mean, his mother called him.
Sorry, not sorry.
Literally,
Sorry,
he
not
said,
sorry.
my mother called me and said, Daniel, do you have something you want to tell me? And he
Is it
was
time
like,
to- He's like,
no!
Blame it
Yeah,
on
yeah.
Bruce. That should be the
Exactly.
next podcast.
Well, that would be brilliant.
We can blame a
Blame
lot
it
on Bruce. Yeah, blame it on Bruce
Yeah.
is the next one. Come on. Everything that you've got everybody into trouble for doing. Because you can coax mischief out of people.
Right,
I can
it's
tell.
like, right.
Takes one to know one.
Mhm. Yes, it does.
Mm-hmm.
We have that thing. So your first film was with Daniel Craig.
And then pretty much simultaneously, I shot Alfie. And Alfie felt like a big thing. I mean, Daniel wasn't Bond.
Uh-huh.
He was a very respected actor,
Uh-huh.
did a lot of theatre. And then there was an amazing cast of like British actors. But
I
Jude
love
at the
British
time,
actors. I love
me
them.
too. Jude Law was a big old star at that point.
Jude Law, I mean, hello.
That felt like a big moment because and Susan Sarandon was in it, and it was Charles Shire directed it, and it was a studio, and it was like an ordeal to get. I'd
Right.
sort of for Layer Cake, I'd like met Matthew Vaughn, and they offered me the part, so I didn't really understand. He'd been a producer. It was the first movie he directed. It was exciting, but in retrospect, it's very exciting.
Right.
Paramount, a studio, I was like, wow.
Right. It's like the
Having
big,
to screen test and
Right.
go through all the rigmarole of getting a part. And that was a moment where I was like, I think I'm doing this, but I didn't. I had total imposter syndrome.
Right. It's very normal.
It's so boringly common amongst
Right.
people in this industry. Like, you're on a movie set. I hadn't been on a movie set. I was,
Right.
There's a set and there's a crew and they say action, which was
Right.
just like, it was all so new and it was on quite a large scale.
Welcome back to Table for Two, where we're having lunch with the incredible Sienna Miller. She's been in more than 30 films and nominated for both a BAFTA and a Golden Globe. But Sienna started out as a model. No big surprise. And I'm wondering, how did it feel to make that transition into acting? How does it feel when they say, especially then, I mean, I did one commercial. I did a couple of commercials in my early years.
Yeah.
I was a horrible actor. I tried for a second.
Did you? For how long's a second? 20 years?
Just, yeah. I just gave it up. And I remember it was a regional commercial for Merwin's department store. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I was sitting there and I was with this woman. We were playing a young married couple, like gonna have a pillow fight. But I just, all of a sudden, they were like, and action.
And you were like,
I thought,
ooh.
oh my God, no. Like, I actually now do something that all these like 50 people who are here to do their jobs are waiting for me
Yeah,
to
it's
do.
like, go.
I'm like, I don't know how to do this. So I mean, on a much lesser scale, I think I understand when you also you find yourself. How did that feel?
But just like
for
a
you?
clapperboard was like a novelty. I was excited to see that. Like I
Right.
had a toy one at home. You know what I mean? Like
Right,
it was
right.
just, I was very, very green.
When did you start to feel like, oh, I'm in the room and I got it?
No, I don't know that
Come on.
no, the first time that I actually was like, okay, maybe I do know what because I didn't really know. It's very technical making a film.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't understand, I remember my first ever scene in Alfie was a Steadicam shot, and I didn't understand that I had to get the whole take right, that it was an uneditable thing.
Right.
So I was like, why are we doing this 20 times? Like what? Like that bit was good, and that bit,
Right.
I'd sort of like read the book on how you can edit a film, and
Right.
it was a problem because it was a dance move, and it had to be perfect from start to finish, and I just didn't really understand. Then I did a movie called Factory Girl, which was an amazing character, Edie Sedgwick. Yeah, and I remember working. Guy Pearce played Warhol, and I was like, I'm just going to jump into this because like who doesn't want to be Edie Sedgwick
Right.
for a moment in their life, and
Right.
B, what a world to explore. And I've always been interested in people, like and characters, and she was definitely both.
Yeah.
So we lived in the Chelsea Hotel, and Guy was going all method, and I was like, I'm just gonna like get lost in this a little bit.
Right.
And so we would only call each other Edie and Andy. We'd have phone conversations like they used to do, and we'd go out at night. And it just kind of consumed, I think, the both of us. Then we moved to Shreveport, Louisiana, where we shot the movie, which was not the same backdrop as New York.
That
but
is not the same
but you know what? We made it work. And and I kind of got quite alarmingly, not in the ways that Edie, derailed, but I psychologically felt very much her.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, maybe this is the right profession.
Right.
And maybe I am able to do it. And being surprised by an emotional reaction that wasn't planned or constructed or,
Right.
just living something, because it was fun. And hanging out with the people who used to be in the factory and hearing those stories and
Yeah.
like Bridget Berlin and all of these crazy characters.
Being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes for that amount of
And like
time.
letting yourself go into
Yes.
it, it's quite scary because then
Right.
the movie ended and I was like, I didn't know who I was. I just couldn't
Really?
take the pants and the tights off. I was
Right.
like, literally wore that for the next 8 weeks. and
Right. Wow.
It was just a bit like, oh, okay, there's got to be a boundary here.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just a nut job.
What is the most challenging thing about being a mom, and what do you worry about? Because I always find it interesting, like when I was a kid, I was all over the place and never worrying, and I don't think my parents worried,
No.
boo. But now I go, oh, okay, are there things from your life that you pull from and just life that you go, okay?
I don't know. I think parenting is so influenced by the culture and the moment and the zeitgeist that is the state of the world when you have kids. So,
True.
Looking back to my childhood, which was wonderful and eccentric and probably neglectful in a way that made me very self-sufficient.
Right.
My generation of parents were very involved and we're very, it's very, there's...
Your generation of parents were very involved, you're saying? Like your
As
mom-
in my contemporary parents.
Oh,
my parents,
right.
no.
Okay,
there wasn't
right,
a baby
okay.
monitor.
Got it, right.
I'm sure I was screaming in the cot for hours. Whatever
Right,
happened,
right.
I'm able to handle shit
Right.
and kind of manage myself with, probably a little broken child somewhere inside the very
Yeah, of
strong
course.
veneer. But my child, I think what's hardest is, I mean, you get it wrong no matter what you do. They fuck you up, your mum and dad.
Yeah.
They don't mean to, but they do.
Yeah, they try their best.
Yes, but I guess the navigation between the freedom she wants, it's just a constant dialogue of, look, actually the hardest thing for me is trying to protect my child from the influence of what is happening online in the world
Yes.
and what social media and phones have done to our brains, and we
Yeah.
grew up without them.
Right. And you're
How do you
so good that you
focus?
don't use it and you don't do it.
Yeah, but I creep occasionally. I
Right.
mean, and the reason I don't do it is because it's so absorbing. And
Yeah.
how do you deal with a young mind that is growing,
Yeah.
that is being, that their attention is being so sucked into a world? And COVID meant that they were all on screens all the time. So
Exactly.
to detox from those 2 years of schooling, and the only way to communicate with friends, I have an only child.
Right.
So to try to kind of protect her whilst understanding that that's probably where the world is going to be anyway, and curate a curious person, we're in uncharted waters as to where this is all going.
Yeah.
I don't know what a job is going to be when my daughter is 18.
Right.
I don't know what is going to be,
What university will look like, if it's going to be anything.
I want her to read books desperately.
Right.
It's really hard for kids to focus enough to do that. But I know that if you have that, you will never be lonely in life, because you
What
have
are
these
you
worlds.
Because, and how did you become, because I'm sure that's a strong influence on your daughter, because you have to see your parent reading. How did you become a reader? And do you see that in her?
She loves stories. She loves like making films. She's sort of endlessly filming and editing things, which makes me happy. But of course that involves a screen, not,
Right.
a VHS, whatever it was when we were young.
Right.
I am rereading 100 Years of Solitude because I found it in a library of a place that I was at, and
Okay.
I loved it.
I just read the Young Mungo.
Oh, I've heard that's incredible, and it's so sad, but incredible.
So sad.
And not dissimilar to Shuggy Bane, is that right?
Yes.
Yes,
and
which I just
haven't-
read.
So that's my next up, but I don't.
Don't back to back them if it's that.
It's too much,
Yeah,
really.
you need a little interlude.
I might do the
Do
Paul.
some David Sedaris in between,
I mean,
which
come on,
I
I love
just
David Sedaris.
obsessed.
Obsessed.
Has he had lunch with Bruce?
No, he is not.
He has
I
to.
would love David Sedaris
That-
and Amy Sedaris.
Oh my
I
God.
love
Maybe
Amy
both of
Sedaris.
them.
That would be like a sibling lunch. Thanks for joining us today on Table for Two. Sienna has been telling me all about her career and how she's deliberately chosen weightier roles in recent years. But I'm curious, where does she draw her inspiration from? Who were influences as far as
A child?
actresses,
Oh.
child, or who were
In
influences?
terms of reading or just life?
just in life.
I mean, obviously, sort of like Mae West, and I love like Lucille Ball, and I loved
Okay.
all of that, and like vaudeville kind of comedy and 20s films, and the glamour of the 30s. And then Marilyn Monroe, I just thought was just extraordinary and like such a great
Right.
actress. And then Vivian Leigh, and Gilda, and all of this, those movies. And I watched a lot of films. My mother took us to the theater a
She
lot.
did.
So I was, but then as I got older, I loved movies like True Romance, and those are
Right.
like the seminal when I was
Right.
really influential.
Right.
Reality Bites and
Right.
like
You
the
really were
90s.
the 90s.
And all the great characters of women were kind of raucous and badly behaved.
Yes.
Because that was the only way that you could get a great, and the men were sort of idealistic and
Right,
perfect.
right.
And so I think I probably like inherited some characteristics that are just a little bit outrageous from admiring women who were portrayed, like the interesting people were up to no good.
Right. One of the things, and I didn't realize this, so you were in a movie and you played Tippi Hedren,
Yeah.
and I watched it last weekend,
Oh.
and you're amazing in it. And it's,
Thank
it
you.
really is it's a movie to see. The Girl.
The girl.
And the things that really kind of blew me away were like when you were doing the scenes with, when
The
your
birds.
character goes into the attic and his obsession with Tippi Hedren, and she's alive, and she is, and I didn't quite ever know that he was that kind of lecherous of a man, as talented and, genius.
Yeah.
And like all these sort of like its complexity. How did it feel to portray her? You do it.
Thank you.
Perfectly.
Well, I mean, I
And
met
that's not
her
easy. Okay.
and I heard the stories. And this was pre Me
Right.
Too being a conversation or Time's Up being a conversation.
Right.
It was still rampantly
Right.
a part of our industry.
Right.
But understanding the cruelty that went in and the lack of control she had over her career, which, by the way, would have been stratospheric. I mean, she was headed for Between the Birds and Marnie, but he kept her under contract and just watched her get older and older in a time when, past 40 or even 35, you were kind of cooked.
That's why that was her last movie.
So she was offered movies by Goddard and Truffaut. Everybody wanted to work with her.
Right.
And he just said no, but he didn't work with her himself. So he just let her get older and older and older till she would become obsolete. Right. So it's a tragedy.
Yes.
And devastating because she just wouldn't comply.
Right.
And she didn't have the kind of Grace Kelly kind of laugh it off, which it does take. She's just, she's stoic and she's serious and she's, wonderful. But it was very, very torturous. There's actually an amazing play by John Logan called Double Feature and it's fiction, but it's kind of not in terms of understanding what happened between Tippy and Hitchcock. It's very worth reading. But I mean, it's difficult. It's so difficult to legislate on any of this because when we're artists, well-behaved people, it's so complicated.
Right.
They're awful, but is Hitchcock an absolute genius of cinema? Yes.
Yes.
I don't know where I kind of fall in any of this. It's devastating to people. Her career was destroyed by a completely lecherous, manipulative, horrible man who made brilliant work.
Right.
It's a tough
It's
moment.
a very interesting, and we find ourselves, like you said, in the post the Me Too and post all that, like separating the art from the artist and the behavior and who and how, and it's like
a nightmare.
It's a nightmare, and that seemingly, because that was really the first time I kind of heard of it, watching your movie, was like, oh, I didn't realize that, because if this was, now,
Yes.
his career is done.
Yeah.
And just how horrible.
Yeah, she had no power. She
Yeah.
had no, and also they made you sign contracts with studios. So she had signed this thing,
Right.
of course, because it was her first film. She was plucked out of obscurity. She'd
Right.
been in a commercial.
Right.
He'd seen her and really molded her into being what he wanted her to be. And she wouldn't participate in the rest of it. Not that necessarily anybody else did either, but could manage it in a way
Right.
that she just wasn't able to. And he, absolutely destroyed her.
And there was no advocate, it feels. Like there was
No.
for someone like her to say, hey, get me out of that contract and let me start to work. Or and there was no listening or understanding.
No, the studios and those contracts, and you belong to the studio.
Yeah.
It's a very different world.
You've been a real also advocate, and I had a conversation recently with Sharon Stone, who was a real advocate for just equal pay. Like, you've talked about a job that you didn't get after you got it, because you said, well, he's making X, I should be making Y. And basically the answer was bye. Yeah. Have we made progress?
Definitely. In terms of being, in terms of, if anything else, men's awareness of that problem and there being a spotlight on it from the rest of the world. Right. In an industry where we're all paid stupid amounts of money to have fun and be creative. And so comparatively, it's ridiculous to talk about it from the sort of Hollywood perspective. But it was, as it is in every industry, glaringly obvious that there is a huge disparity. And not fairly so, because women are relied heavily upon to market and sell. Yeah. So you should be compensated for, if you're not as big of a star, fine, but you're going to be really the person that is going to front that publicity campaign.
Exactly.
I just had a few experiences where I was so grateful to be a part of something that then went on to make exponential amounts of money, of which I really wasn't paid even, an 100th of somebody that I was acting opposite.
Right.
And relied heavily upon to sell the thing. When a Super Bowl commercial costs like quadruple what you were paid to make a film where your name is above the title, it's kind of hard to digest.
Right.
And I think what was most difficult was that I was just still so grateful for those scraps occasionally, because I was so happy to be there, because I'd honestly do it all for free anyway, because it's what I love to do. But but trying to re-educate the ability to self-advocate. It's a lot of adjectives.
Right. I love it.
And actually having to be quite bullish to get myself, to galvanize myself into a place where I can say what I actually feel. And it's so uncomfortable for me to be anything other than loving and kind and grateful to everybody, because that's annoyingly my default.
It truly is.
But to try to say, like, actually, I'm going to put my foot down is really hard, but really important. Otherwise, you're a doormat. So I think in reflection, I'd seen multiple instances of just being given something and accepting it and not even being aware of how unfair it was.
Right.
And then with the movement of what started happening in our world, kind of understanding that actually maybe that's not fair, and speaking to other actresses who have been braver.
Right.
And and just it's about fairness, and it's about, there is a hugely kind of patriarchal element. Like, people were happy for me.
Yes.
Who are of the opposite sex, for what I was getting. And like, I'm so proud of you for this, and you deserve this. And it was honestly, like, then I found out what they got, and it was just
I think, the reality is when the executive level changes its landscape, when you have women like Donna Langley, who is like in this incredible powerhouse at Universal, who, you have women like Amy Pascal, who's incredible, who've been in the game now and are true advocates for we're hiring, we're running studios. I sat with Sherry Lansing, who and her time at Paramount was wonderful, but she also was in that. And I think her film's just amazing.
Incredible.
She just landed them.
But it was the structure of the world which nobody questioned, because it's just the way things were.
Structure. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But also being in an industry where you're dealing with something that's cost a huge amount of money, which, if it's I like to do independent films, so it's like it doesn't apply to me. But on the odd occasion where I have done studio films, and knowing what they're spending on this, that, and the other, and knowing that you're an integral part of that story, it's more about understanding actually what you're worth, and that's not been an easy thing to get to. But now I'm sort of, by throwing myself out of the plane, and initially I have this great lawyer, Gretchen Rush, who has really helped, and my agents, but really helped re-educate a negotiation process.
Great.
Which initially I had to go in and be like, just think of yourself as a man. What would you do if you were a man?
It's so.
And now I'm just like, actually, no, I won't do it.
Right.
And fuck you.
Well, I hate for our lunch to come to an end. I mean, I really don't want Sienna to leave this table, and if possible, I'd like to fly back to New York with her, but she didn't invite me. I've loved hearing about Sienna's life, her daughter Marlo, and the diversity of her roles on screen. But I'm super curious, what's next for this lady? What do you want the future to be for you in regard to your work? I mean, you're moving back home, which I think is fantastic.
I can't wait.
From a work standpoint, are there parts that you wanted to play? Anything that you would like to remake? I think you're doing something on the West End?
No. Oh, eventually. I'm going to be doing a play next summer, I think. I'm doing 4 movies that Kevin Costner is directing.
Oh, right. That whole
called
thing.
Horizon.
Right. Horizon.
And we've done 1.5 of them. And then we have whatever. I can't do maths now. I've had 2 glasses of rosé, 2.5 left.
Okay.
Does that make 4? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Not my area of expertise. I am good with remembering lines. And that's been incredible. He's an absolute dream, and this is a project he's been writing for 20 years, and it's about 15 years of how the West was won. So I've been in Moab, Utah, making these films in a corset, and I mean, just extraordinary sort of dances with wolves, without the dancing in wolves, but actually some dancing. Okay. But that period of history that he really is the master of, and the most fantastic, elegant, smart man. So I have that to do for the rest of the year. And then this play, I think, next summer, and maybe this other thing before, and maybe this other movie before. And I've got lots, for once, I've got lots lined up. But I suppose what I'd hope would change would be, there's this narrative that you're stuck with often. And I'm very tired of being referred to as underrated. It's sort of...
Sure.
And I think I started working in a moment where women were not respected, and I was going out with somebody very famous, and it was very tabloid, and it was really painful, and it was really public, and I just sort of got labeled. I got saddled with these labels that really never fit myself.
Right.
And therefore, it was surprising when my work became serious and was able to be taken seriously. But this oft underrated tag, I'm really ready to shed. And just,
Yeah.
but the best thing about being the age that I now am is that I don't really care
Yeah.
about any of it. I don't need to be the biggest movie star. I don't have like a burning ambition. I love my job. I love
Right.
my life. I love my friends.
Right.
Love you. I love wine and food.
I mean, this is what
but
it's all about.
I don't really care enough to
Yeah.
be focused singularly or myopically on a career. I'm frustrated. That would be my one frustration.
Understandable.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort
surprising if I am good in something still. I'm like, God,
of really
boring.
Well, I mean, you mean surprising in
From a journalistic
From a
perspective,
right,
I
right.
feel within a room and in
Yes.
our industry at the weekend. I mean, I feel like
Completely.
great friends. We've all known each other for years at this
Right,
point. Yeah.
right. I get that. I get also when, things happen in your life at certain decades in your life and all of a sudden they define you and you're like, well, wait, how did that define me?
I wasn't really
And this
complicit
was
in any of
not-
it. Yeah.
This was not, and now we have so much 2020 in the hindsight of everything that was going on in regard to, you fall in love with who you fall in love with, and then all of a sudden that becomes something, and that
Yes.
sort of defines you, and you're like, what the hell? And then everything that's sort of come up. And yesterday I had this crazy, and I had this crazy thing pop up on my computer, which was about like you're being hacked. And I believed it.
Oh, did it say that you've been watching porn and I'm going to
Yes.
photo?
And of course
I've got it as well.
called. And I spoke to this man
Oh,
from
no.
India, and he was like,
Yes, I have
"Y-
a video of you
have-
wanking."
You're on child." It was horrible.
Oh
and
my
then
God,
and I
Bruce.
started to talk to him, and then I was like, okay. And then it started to dawn on me, and I was like, oh. So then I pushed back. I go. He's like, well, and what are your bank like? Who do you bank
Oh
with?
my God.
But I didn't give anything specific. But it was very upsetting. Like, you're like, well, what? And then I started to say, well, who did you just speak to? And da-da-da-da. And so eventually he hung up. And I
Yes.
was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, there are people trying to, like,
Oh, God.
it's when I called my bank and I told Sheila. She was like, hi, this is Sheila. And I was
This
like,
is like, hey,
Sheila.
Sheila.
I was like, Sheila. So this just happened to me. And he says I'm watching this and doing it.
Which
She's
I'm
like,
not, you're
"Oh."
not doing.
No,
but yeah.
I'm like, she's like, you're being fished. And I was like, oh my God, I was
Love
being
Sheila.
fished.
Get
I
her
love
for lunch.
Sheila.
Get her for
Right?
lunch.
Like Sheila was so real. She was still, I mean, like a representative of like a big bank.
Yes.
And I was like, thanks, Sheila.
Yeah, just
I mean, my kid
reassuring.
is in the car and my kid's listening to this. I'm like, and by the way,
Those emails are horrific.
it's so scary.
I got one the other day. It's like, we know you've been watching porn and we have a video of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we are going to send it to your contacts. And I was just like, do it. It's
right,
not true.
Right. No. I got one of those a while ago and I
Yeah.
called up my friend Andy Cohen and said, is this true? And he
And
goes,
he's like, I get it all the time.
exactly. He's like, absolutely not. Disregard it. 'Cause I was like, well, this is
They really get people on
crazy.
it, though. My
They're
poor
gonna
mum
send it
was
to
like,
somebody.
yeah.
Right. It's like, it's very different than me taking Daniel to a gay bar and then it hits the National
Yes,
Enquirer.
all
and
of
it's
that was
true.
amazing. And I did see it.
Sienna, I want to congratulate you on extrapolations. I want to congratulate you on all your projects. I got to say, if you haven't seen Sienna Miller's movies, which I can't imagine,
No,
you got
7 people have. So,
fucking
yeah, for the
go
rest of
see
you
that.
out there.
And you are like a joy, and literally, this has been a pleasure. Thank you
I would have lunch with you every day.
for
Thank
joining
you for
me on
having
Table
me.
for Two. Ooh, let me move my rosé.
Yeah, just spilt it all over
no,
our
it was a
arms. But
splash.
it's okay. We're just gonna
No, seriously, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's
I
truly an
adore
honor.
you.
I adore you
from
too.
the offset.
I mean,
Yeah.
seriously.
Yeah.
Thank you for pulling up a chair today.
Yeah.
And thank you for
Thanks
being
for
with me.
the cheese sandwich coma I'm about to be in.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Table for Two with Bruce Bozzi is produced by iHeartRadio, 737 Park, and Airmail. Our executive producers are Bruce Bozzi and Nathan King. Table for Two is researched and written by Bridget Arsenault. Our sound engineers are Paul Bowman and Alyssa Midcalf. Table for Two's LA production team is Danielle Romo and Lorraine Virez. Our music supervisor is Randall Poster. Our talent booking is by Jane Sarkin. Special thanks to Amy Sugarman, Uni Scher, Kevin Uvain, Bobby Bauer, Allison Cantor-Graber, Barbara and Jen and Jeff Klein and the staff at the Tower Bar in the world-famous Sunset Tower Hotel. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.